So it's with my pleasure to introduce Joe Reese. Joe has worked on this project for over 15 years, and I don't think anyone knows as much about all of the resources that were discovered over the last 5. So thank you, Joe. Come on.
It is my pleasure to be here to share some of the findings from the Portland-Milwaukee Light Rail Project, which I'm going to call Light Rail Project during the presentation. And both of our names are Joe, by the way, so it can be a little confusing. My start in the project was about 15 years ago. The project started out as a north-south or south-north corridor project. Then it was a south corridor project, and part of that project did get built. That was the alignment along I-205, and some other things got built. And then this became the Milwaukee-Portland Light Rail Project and the Portland-Milwaukee Light Rail Project. So we've seen it go for many, many years, and I have to tell you that as an archaeologist, I love what I do, but I also really love seeing a project through and seeing it done. And this is the Tillicum Bridge during the construction period. It's on the cover of our report. I really like seeing projects done. So I'm so gratified that I've been able to be along for the ride for all this time. So thanks to Metro and TriMet for having us do the project. I'm gonna do a little overview. It's just a little scripty, I know, but I'm gonna do a little overview, and then we're gonna drill down on some of the individual sites that we found. A lot of the archaeology the alignment's on streets for a lot of it, and so you can't really do your normal archaeology to discover sites before a project. So we were doing a lot of during construction work when these sites were found, although there were a few other sites found ahead of time. So here we go. The Portland-Milwaukee Light Rail Project is being constructed due to growth forecasts that anticipate 100,000 new jobs along the light rail corridor by 2030, and the need for alternatives to road congestion. In addition, 40,000 new jobs are anticipated in downtown Portland within the next 25 years, and the south waterfront is expected to grow exponentially, with nearly 10,000 new residents and 13,600 jobs projected by 2030. The light rail line is forecast to provide 17,000 trips a day after its first year of operation and near 23,000 a day by 2030. The project will open on September 12th, 2015, on schedule and under budget. This event is one of several events highlighting the opening of the project. Other planned events include an evening presentation on the public art, a fireworks display, woohoo, I love those, and a family-friendly Grand Ronde Village, this will be fun, at the foot of Tillicum Crossing. And Tillicum is derived from a Grand Ronde help on the project. For more information on these events, go to catchtheorange.com. Because the project is receiving federal funds, federal laws mandate that archaeological and historic resources be identified and that impacts to significant resources, including buildings, structures, sites, or objects, be avoided when possible, and if not, that the effects be reduced or mitigate for the effect. Excuse me. This work is done at the direction of the lead federal agency for the project, and in this case, it's the Federal Transit Administration, the FTA. AIW, my firm, worked closely with Metro and TriMet to complete the cultural resource studies needed to meet the Federal Transit Administration's obligations. For initial design and planning phases, AIW identified known and likely locations of archaeological resources, and plans were made on how to handle possible discoveries, since much of the construction would be in paved urban areas where cultural materials, archaeological materials, were likely to be encountered. And so what you're seeing on this slide is if I can use the pointer, this is a high probability area. You can see I do this every day, right? High probability area that we identified on Lincoln. Lincoln has gotten bigger since it was originally created, and you're going to see underneath here the little black stuff has to do with Sanborn maps, which many of you probably are aware of, and they give us an idea of what was probably along there and buried by the street, which was then going to get popped open. So we considered that to be a high probability area, and it turned out to be the case. Buried things. Because much of the light rail alignment was paved, Typical archaeological site identification methods such as walkover surveys and shovel probing by hand could not be completed prior to project construction without great effort and cost. Archaeologists were assigned to monitor project construction in areas where that were identified through research as having a high probability for intact archaeological deposits below pavement. Having an archaeologist on site at these high probability areas during project construction allows for a fast response when intact deposits of cultural materials are inadvertently encountered by construction workers. Likewise, they allow for construction to continue in a timely manner if materials encountered do not represent an archaeological resource. Urban areas often have a multi-layered context due to their continuous use over extended periods of time. This context is made more complex by previous ground disturbances such as the construction and demolition of buildings, placement of utilities, fires or flood events, we found all of this, by the way, and cutting and filling areas with heavy machinery, which can mix items from different time periods or move materials from one location to another. AIW archaeological monitors were tasked with identifying intact cultural materials within this complex environment. When possible, archaeological materials were identified, an intact deposit, that's really important. They were followed up and documentation of the find was completed for FTA, TriMet, and the State Historic Preservation Office before construction was allowed to continue. As a result of this effort, AIW identified 23 total cultural resources that were encountered during project construction. These resources were predominantly buried historic period archaeological deposits and structures that were once features of septic systems. And you're going to see more of this one. This is actually a privy pit that was encountered. A total of 6 archaeological sites were recommended for controlled excavations by AIW archaeologists before construction was allowed to continue. These excavations were done to gather additional information about the site beyond what was discovered during project construction. Subsurface excavations are often necessary to gain a better understanding of the significance of a site in addition to its extent and integrity. And integrity is the integrity of the deposit. Is it really pretty much in good shape? So that we can peel back the layers and really tell a story about what happened without making up too much. Excavation plans are coordinated with a State Historic Preservation Office, which issues permits to conduct the archaeological excavations within known archaeological sites. Demolition debris was found throughout the light rail project, reflecting changing land use patterns and the advent of 20th century urban renewal projects. Some of us, I can tell from the audience, remember urban renewal in Portland. For instance, we identified debris along Southwest Lincoln Street that was left behind after demolitions occurred in Southwest Portland for the South Auditorium Urban Renewal Project. This project came about in 1955 when a mayor's advisory committee identified the blocks bound by Southwest Market Street, Front, Arthur, and 4th Avenue for redevelopment since it was considered to be a blighted area. Many businesses were displaced, including hotels and rooming houses, taverns, recyclers, restaurants, warehouses, and small trade stores, and homes of elderly, low-income, and ethnic minorities were removed. Demolition remains, including sections of foundations, crumbled architectural debris, hardware, electrical components, and other lost and discarded items, were often left behind to be flattened or leveled, toppled by fill, and sometimes paved over so that new buildings could be constructed. And so it goes. Remnants of Harbor Drive, including a former underpass tunnel and retaining wall, were also discovered during the light rail construction excavations near NATO Parkway. Portland voters approved a bond issue for the construction of Harbor Drive in May of 1940 in order to help alleviate heavy traffic in downtown Portland. Much of the Harbor Drive was removed in the early 1970s following completion of the Fremont Bridge and Interstate 405 in 1973. Also influencing this change was a citywide effort to reclaim the waterfront along the west side of the Willamette River for a public park. The Portland City Council, with the support of state transportation officials, approved closure of Harbor Drive in 1972. Portions of Harbor Drive, including the underpass tunnels and retaining walls associated with an interchange east of Southwest NATO Parkway near its intersection with Lincoln Street, were eventually abandoned and structures were buried beneath fill dirt associated with subsequent roadway projects. Buried rails and other features associated with streetcar systems provided a tangible link to the region's transportation history. Several discovered sites consisted of the remnants of former rail systems. The use of former urban and interurban rail lines peaked by the 1930s before falling into steady decline due to the increasing popularity of the automobile and public bus system. Many rail systems were paved over to accommodate automobile use, and most of the early streetcar lines were abandoned by 1950. I have to say that I actually rode one of those early trolley lines when I was a kid, a really, really young kid. A brick drainage feature discovered along Southeast McLaughlin Boulevard was part of an 1893 Portland Traction Company streetcar trolley line between Portland and Oregon City that was updated in 1903. The brick drainage feature was designed, by the way, archaeologists call built things of any kind a hard feature, so we're going to call this a feature throughout this talk. The brick drainage feature was designed to drain away water from the trolley line and protect the toe of an adjacent slope from erosion. The trolley line was a prominent linear transportation feature in the area until the construction of Highway 99E, which is McLaughlin Boulevard, in the 1930s. This was one of my favorite sites from the project. The artifacts we encountered at two sites, they're called, and these are site numbers that we use, you don't have to really remember them, there's no pop quiz. 35 MU 220 and 35 MU 226 in downtown Portland are associated with a former store and residences that were owned and occupied by Jewish families. Both sites were encountered at the intersection of Southwest 4th Avenue and Southwest Lincoln Street in an area that had a large Jewish immigrant population near the turn of the 20th century. And Portland had a lot of ethnic neighborhoods until probably urban renewal period throughout Portland. 3 houses and a store were crowded onto this lot by the late 1800s. At that time, the store and one of the houses were owned by Isaac Offner, who immigrated to the United States from Austria in 1884. In about 1939, all buildings on this lot were demolished and the area was paved over when a new gas and service station were constructed. We found artifacts ranging from the late 1800s to the early 1900s at this location that enhanced our understanding of this early Jewish neighborhood of Portland. Archaeological sites related to both small and large-scale manufacturing took place during the 1800s and early 1900s were discovered in Portland and Milwaukee during the project. The Iron Fireman, Fireman Manufacturing Company, once operated near the industrial waterfront of Southwest Portland. While monitoring construction at Southwest Native Parkway, we identified remnants of the building which had been lost to fire in 1944. Remnants of the Portland Reduction Works and the Inman Polson Lumber Company mill were also identified. These two older industries in the southeast Portland industrial district employed thousands of migrant workers, immigrant workers, excuse me, mainly Germans and Italians who had settled nearby in the early 1900s. We also identified sites at the former location of the Oregon Worsted Mill on southeast McLaughlin Boulevard and a former pottery and brick factory in Milwaukee. Buried foundation remnants, demolition debris, and abandoned equipment were encountered during the light rail construction. Take a sip of water here. And now we're going to run through these sites again, no pop quiz. It's all right. Site 35 MU 220 is the first site we're going to talk about. I think you can see where it is. It's on Lincoln. It's near the downtown end of the project, the start of the project for us. During one of the first days of monitoring for the project, a utility worker informed our archaeological monitor, who was actually monitoring construction, of the presence of a brick-lined shaft feature in the parking lot of a former budget rent-a-car office. It was revealed, or we figured out, it was revealed when a former landowner apparently was attempting to remove an underground oil tank. When the archaeological monitor went to observe the feature and determined it was an archaeological site, the feature was exposed and it had been partially excavated. This is what it looked like when we found it, and TriMet had purchased the parcel. The feature was a brick-lined shaft measuring about 4 feet, and I can give you the metrics if you want, but I'm just going to go feet here because I think we're a feet audience. 4 feet in diameter. Approximately 28 inches of sediment had been removed from the top of this feature. The upper part of the feature had been left like this. The removed sediment had been piled next to the feature and contained historic period artifacts and animal bones. We call animal bones faunal materials. Fancy. Here we go. It was decided that the sediment that had been removed previously would be screened for artifacts and that the rest of the feature would be preserved in place for future archaeological study. This decision was made because no direct project impacts were anticipated at this location. A total of 1,619 artifacts were collected from the feature, that's in that fill dirt that was off to the side, in addition to approximately 3,000 animal bone fragments. Numerous domestic items were identified, including medicine bottles that predate 1910, glassware such as the Southern California Packing Company jar lid at upper right that postdates 1881, and ceramics such as this flow blue transferware manufactured between 1906 and 1910. Personal items included buttons made from shell, bone, metal, and milk glass, and shoe nails, collar button, there's some of these back there, parts of a pocket watch, and sewing supplies, all seen at the upper left. At upper right are doll parts, a ceramic marble, and fragments of a child's tea set, and below is a bone toothbrush. The artifacts recovered from the sediment excavated from the feature appear to represent household refuse that was thrown away during the late 1800s and early 1900s. The shaft feature was located near the back stoop of the Jacob Szymanski household and was also located near a grocery store and attached house where Isaac Offner lived from approximately 1884 to 1905. The store and houses of the block were demolished in about the 1930s, at which time the block was capped with pavement and a gas station and the auto repair shop, which was later the Budget Minicar store, were constructed at this location. And what you're seeing are the aerial photo, and you're going to see these maps over and over again that have the sandhorn overlay, so they're kind of a historic view, and then a site, and the project footprint is that red line that goes around there, so they're a little busy, but hopefully you can see some of the buildings in there. On the same block as the brick shaft feature, artifacts were encountered due to excavations in February of 2012. So in February 2012, then we started getting into more finds in the actual alignment. At first, only debris from the demolition of the houses and store that were located here at the turn of the 20th century was encountered, but additional excavations revealed an intact bottle and jar deposit in a former privy that had been filled with household trash from the late 1800s and early 1900s. People throw trash in privies when they no longer need them, or they just end up throwing them in there even when they are using them. It kind of fills up the hole. The debris, and we like it as archaeologists because they're nice stratified sites. I know that they're important. The debris left behind from the circa 1930s demolition of the houses and store at this location included various foundation remnants. All foundation remnants encountered were brick construction and were documented prior to their removal. Within the corner of one such foundation remnant, that's at the upper left, an intact deposit of bottles and jars was found at site 35 MU 226. Glass jars and bottles ranged in date from 1908 to 1937 and included a large food jar that dates to 1937. Subsequent archaeological excavations by us at the location of the find encountered household kitchen items and architectural debris associated with the 1930s demolition that occurred on the block. As construction work continued at this location, a privy was discovered during the excavation of a trench during construction on Southwest Lincoln Street. The on-site monitor stopped work, and AIW soon excavated the feature to determine its age and extent. And it's hard to see in here. Now you can see the actual outline of the privy in some of the later photos, I think. Here we go. I'm just going to point. So you can kind of see the square out. You can kind of see that square outline, and you can kind of see it in the top. You're looking straight down, so you can see that pretty good. And now I've lost my place. We excavated the privy as part of the larger test unit and made sure to screen the sediment that came from within the privy outline separately from the sediment that was outside the area. We continued the excavation until no more artifacts were encountered. So you're just seeing a bunch of artifacts as we're going down, and that's a pipe that came through, a utility pipe that came through and interrupted the privy. So it's a little complex. The date range of artifacts recovered from the privy implied that the items were likely disposed of at this location during the 1880s. Many food bottles were found within the privy and included those for relish, mustard, horseradish, and possibly imported olive oil, as seen in the photograph at the upper left. Below this photograph are white ironstone ceramic items, including a soup tureen lid, coffee cup, and dinner plate. At right are a bottle from a local druggist, a sample magic oil bottle, we have that in the case, by the way, and a medicine and perfume bottle. It is unknown at what date the privy was dug, but a small structure that may have sheltered the privy is depicted at this approximate location on an 1879 lithograph of Portland. Based on this lithograph and other historic period maps, we have concluded that this structure was likely removed by 1889 when Lincoln Street was widened and a sewer line was constructed through the street. It is likely that the privy was abandoned at this time and that items were placed within it as a way to dispose of them before this location was sealed by the widened Southwest Lincoln Street. And now we're going to go to another site that is closer to the river. It's on Moody. It's still on the west side in the downtown area. And this is site 35MU232. It is located in Portland's south waterfront area, just east of I-5 and west of Southwest Moody Avenue, and the new Telecom Crossing Bridge that was constructed as part of the light rail project. The site was identified when a bulldozer contouring the hillside, seen at left, exposed a thick layer of sediment that was contained beneath earth, charcoal, and a concentration of historic period artifacts. We conducted archaeological testing in order to find the site extent and to determine whether the site was historically significant. One surprising result of the excavation was the amount of shell that was encountered. An estimated 5,500 fragments of shell were collected from the site in our test units. Most of these shells were from native oysters, while a smaller number were attributed to non-native Pacific oysters, which were introduced to the Pacific Northwest from Japan in 1902. This indicates that the deposit of oyster shells we encountered dated to 1902 at the earliest, but probably close to that time. A majority of artifacts recovered from the site were manufactured between the 1880s and 19-teens. From their vertical distribution throughout the site, we determined that the artifacts were deposited in quick succession after 1907, but before 1920, and that the site was capped by fill sediment in the 1950s. Overall, nearly 2,900 historic period artifacts were recovered from the site. They include the bottle fragments pictured at top left, the 1892 Barber quarter below, and Barber was one of the U.S. Mint honchos, and so they're called that for the period of time that he was the mint, in charge of the mint. 1892 Barber quarter below, the porcelain teaware at top right with transfer patterns and hand painting, and the decorative pressed glass fragments at bottom right that date to about 1880 to 1910. We concluded that site 35MU232 likely represented a small neighborhood dump where refuse was discarded at the base of a hill slope between 1907 and 1920. Items found at the site were likely discarded by residents and households near the top of the bluff that was immediately west of the site. The bluff is captured in this 1879 lithograph of Portland, and the site would have been located on the other side of the bluff near McAdam Road. So note, I don't know if you can read this, but on the label, the roads are labeled, and it's MC and then capital Adam, and we call it McAdam now. So it was McAdam, or somebody thought it was. Anyway, so it's right down slope from that in that particular setting. You know, one of the wonderful things about this lithograph and from this period of time is that you can see all the ravines and streams that Portland had that are no longer apparent. They've been paved over, filled and paved over. This area remained mostly undeveloped from late 1800s through the mid-1900s, but was drastically changed when interstate highway construction began during the late 1950s. Construction of the Bald Rock Freeway, an early section of Interstate 5, and the later construction of the Markham Bridge to the north required that the houses that were once situated on the bluff above Site 35-232 be removed. You can kind of see some, I don't know if this is going to work, but you can kind of see some houses there, and there, and the right in the freeway. So, this aerial view of the site location with a 1924 to 1950 Sanborn map overlay shows where residences were once located on this bluff west of the site before they were removed in the 1950s. U.S. Census records and site directories indicate that the people that lived in these houses were predominantly working class. Its typical occupations included blacksmith, millwright, and teamster. And now we're crossing the river, and we've moved down to Milwaukee, and that's Kellogg Lake there. Site 35CL 337 was recorded before light rail construction began in 2008. Fragments of brick, bottle glass, and stoneware were found near the intersection of Southeast McLaughlin Boulevard and Southeast River Road. We knew from this previous work in historic period maps that the Fischer Pottery operated at this location between about 1878 and 1923, and that a later owner of one land parcel, Jacob Gorsak, also operated a pottery from roughly 1942 to 1951. Remember, this is pre-plastic, so potters were really important. Based on this information, we had recommended that an archaeologist be on site when excavations occurred at this location for light rail construction. In July of 2012, our on-site archaeologist first identified a foundation remnant and later saw a brick-lined shaft feature, that had been exposed during construction. This brick-lined shaft was discovered during trench excavations below debris left behind from the demolition of buildings associated with Charles Fischer's former brick and tile factory. Within this debris were historic period artifacts including metal pieces, ceramic fragments, and whole bottles that were manufactured between the 1920s and 1940s and were intermixed with fragments of brick and terracotta. To determine whether, you can see how archaeologists, how much fun we get to have, right? This is really, and I have to say we had a lot of safety precautions taken in place here. We even had air being pumped down. They took care of us. To determine whether this brick-lined shaft contained intact deposits of artifacts, we decided to excavate sediment from within the feature. To do this, we first had to remove modern crushed gravels and sediment that had been placed within the shaft feature when it was impacted by sewer line construction in about 1972. Demolition debris was also removed from the upper part of the feature until we reached what appeared to be intact sediment. Once the sediment was reached, we excavated a test unit to see if intact archaeological deposits were present. The upper levels of this test unit revealed that we were still digging within gravels and sediment that likely fell within the feature during the 1972 sewer line construction. Lower levels encountered more demolition debris that contained historic period artifacts. We still had artifacts, but it was kind of messed up. We stopped excavations before reaching the bottom of the feature due to safety concerns and the low likelihood that we would encounter anything different from the demolition debris we had consistently encountered. The artifacts that we collected from the shaft feature represent pottery remnants and household items that were intermixed with demolition debris. In total, we collected 455 fragmented and complete items. At left are examples of cosmetic and perfume bottles from the 1940s. At right are fragments of the ceramic tableware that were also produced in the 1940s. And these are just items that we found that were probably related to somebody who was living on that parcel. And one little funny story, we found, these look really kind of clean and tidy right now, but when we're digging out there and we bring stuff up, it's dirty and you can't really tell what you got. And we were puzzling over like a metal tube about the size of my thumb at one point, trying to figure out, just in the lab, trying to figure out what it was. And all of us who were puzzling over it were women, which is important to this little short story. And so one of the guys comes up and we said, we don't know what this is. And he said, what's a lipstick tube? It was one of those old, they had the little, That was embarrassing to us. So. Several sample glazed pots were found within fill materials near the surface of the shaft feature, and this is actually attributed to the pottery, and in several of the lower excavated levels. Fragments of flower pots were also found throughout the feature and had varying glaze colors, patterns, and rim styles. We think that the pottery examples and fragments found within the shaft feature were associated with the later pottery of Jacob Gorsek and not the earlier pottery established by Charles Fischer. Few artifacts were identified within the shaft feature that would align with the site's 1878 to 1923 use by Fischer. Instead, most of the artifacts encountered were more closely aligned with the 1930s demolition of buildings at this location to make way for the construction of McLaughlin Boulevard and the subsequent use of the site by potter Jacob Gorsek and his family. These are testers, little tiny pots. We have them in the case too. They're really cute. And we're just a wee bit farther south, from where the pottery site was. And this is going to be site CL 338. CL is for Clackamas. Just south of site 35 CL 337 along Southeast McLaughlin Boulevard in Milwaukee, we responded to the inadvertent discovery of what initially appeared to be a brick wall in November of 2012. So it's starting to get rainy now, and that's important, you'll see. It was identified by construction workers along the route of the former Portland Traction Streetcar Company trolley line between Kellogg Lake in Milwaukee and Jennings Lodge to the south near Gladstone. The remnants of this streetcar line, which was constructed in 1893 and abandoned in 1968, were recorded by A&W as an archaeological site 35CL 338. The site was recorded prior to the light rail project in 2008, when portions of the former streetcar alignment were being turned into the trolley trail, a multi-use recreational path for cyclists and pedestrians. So we were working for Clackamas County for the trail at that time, and we recorded the old trolley line through there, but we didn't have an opportunity to see what you're going to get to see. We got that discovery, and we just added it into the site form. This is all bureaucratic paper pushing stuff. The brick feature was discovered at the toe of a hill slope. I hope you guys can see that. And a little bit of brick right in there. Oh God, I'm not good at this. There we go. The brick feature was discovered at the toe of the hill slope. Residential areas are located above the feature and to the west, farther out of sight, and southeast McLaughlin Boulevard is located to the east behind our view here. When this slope was being cleared of trees and other vegetation, brick was exposed at what would have been the outer edge of the former streetcar's track alignment. In addition to the exposed brick that appeared to form a wall, crushed brick was visible in muddy areas below where heavy machinery had scraped away sediment. You can see a little bit of that in the foreground, the lower part of the photo. This indicated that this one exposure was likely a small section of some kind of a constructed brick feature, possibly one that was associated with a former streetcar, or the nearby highway, or the historic period homes at the top of the hill to the west. So we just had this little peek and we had to start figuring it out. Once we began to expose the feature to better understand its extent and possible function, we were surprised by what we found. At our first exposure of the feature, a brick wall section, we'd go in and we kind of clean this off, and that's what we're doing here. A brick wall section was clearly evident that was built into the angled hill slope to the west, but the feature also had a brick base and featured a small lip on its eastern edge, the lower edge, that appeared to have been impacted by compression. So you can see how it's going up the hill slope. I hope you can see that. It's flat, and then there's like a little foot to it that comes up. As we continued to expose different sections of the feature, we quickly discovered that different materials and designs had been used for its construction in different places. So we're walking along the hill slope and trying to see its extent. For instance, this section of the feature had a flat brick base and a stacked brick lip, but chunks of concrete fashioned into blocks had been used to construct the west wall within the hill slope. In addition, it connected to a corrugated metal pipe. Can you see that here? Yeah, you can see that here. That extended north and ended at yet another brick section of the feature, near to where you can see the group of people huddled in the distance in the photograph, so you can see where the pipe pops out. And it was raining by then. In all, we exposed the feature at 11 locations. along this hill slope. The northern portion of the feature was constructed of cobblestones, brick and stone, and transitioned between a traditional trough shape with a flat base to one with an entirely curved base. Only a very small section of the northern portion of the feature had a wall built into the slope of the hillside, which was a common feature of this southern section. So there's a difference in the north to south extent, and it's a pretty long feature. The southern section was almost entirely constructed of brick. Between the two sections was that corrugated pipe. There's a little gappy thing there in the middle that we're going to be talking about. When we began to research the feature to determine its use during the historic period, it became clear that it was likely constructed in association with the 1893 trolley line. Not only does the feature follow its alignment, but the corrugated metal pipe is where one of the trolley stops, Lakewood Station, had been located. There's Lakewood Station. The photograph at upper left shows Lakewood Station stop in the 1930s. Note the stairway behind the stop that climbs up the hill slope to provide easy access for residents that live in the neighborhoods to the west. At right, the setback or cut in the hill slope that we had observed during our excavations seemed to align with the former Lakewood Station. So you can kind of see the gap.
I'll try it. That little gap here.
We're looking at these similar views of the trolley alignment. One taken in the 1930s and the other taken in 2012 when we were doing our work. The extent to which this alignment had been modified over time becomes clear. The trolley tracks and station have been removed, a transmission line had also been removed, and the hill slope is no longer covered in vegetation. This vegetation prevents any view of the feature in the 1930s photograph. It's very ferny, there are lots of ferns. But what we can see in that historic photo is a small drainage ditch behind the power pole at left. This ditch provided a clue as to what the possible use of this buried feature. I hope you can see it, but probably not. They're right there. At the base of that pole is a culvert. Other clues were provided when we were rained out and could not complete our data recovery excavations in December of 2012. During periods of heavy rain, we were able to observe how rainwater moved through this location. Water would drain down from the top of the hill slope above and collect at the toe of the slope where the feature is located. We were also able to discern that the water flowed from north from this location towards Kellogg Lake, following the alignment of the feature. Being able to see where rainwater both collect and move through this area led us to believe that we were documenting a drainage feature. Ponded water would have presented a dangerous hazard for a trolley, and over time would have likely eroded the adjacent hill slope. Having a drainage feature to collect water coming down from the hill slope would have allowed for its conveyance away from the trolley tracks, facilitating its continued operation in wet weather. Here in the Pacific Northwest, brick drains are not as common as they are in other areas of the U.S. This is an example of a brick drain at the edge of a lane at Mount Vernon, the home of George Washington. And I happened to visit there at the same time we were doing our project. It was very nice. None of the maps we consulted during our research show this feature adjacent to the trolley. But based on its design, we concluded that it was likely constructed as an exposed feature, and that its eventual abandonment when it became buried in sediment from the adjacent hill slope over time. The design of the drain varied greatly along its extent, which we measured to be about 682 feet in length. The northern section pictured here was constructed of cobblestones and had a trough shape with angled walls and a flat base. We're going to trip through some slides here that show you little bits of it. Farther south, the feature transitioned to brick and was curved throughout. Approaching the former location of Lakewood Station, the curved trough shape began to rise up to the upslope area to the west to form a wall. This wall was constructed of a mixture of brick and cut stone. To both the north and south of the former Lakewood Station location, the feature narrowed to better match the diameter of the corrugated pipe at the center of the feature. The section seen here is south of the station location. It was a flat brick base and a stacked brick lip to the east and a wall of blocky concrete to the west, and is built into the hill slope. Continuing south. The blocky concrete wall transition to, can you tell we really liked this thing? I mean, really, it's great. Transition to a dry laid brick wall, you're bored, I know, within the hill slope. The flat base continues through this transition, as does the eastern stack lip. At its southern extent, the feature tapered quite drastically. When we first observed the southern terminus of the feature, we thought the curved east lip was part of the design, but upon further study, we concluded that it had likely been impacted by compression, something had smashed it. Prior to this change, the east lip was likely a similar design and height as the west wall, similar to the cobblestone section of the feature to the north. This photograph captures the light rail construction in 2014, looking south from a point near the southern terminus of the brick drainage feature. It's hidden and gone back in there. Light rail trains are now operating in the corridor for signals and communication testing in preparation for the grand opening September 12th of this year. We hope you can all make it and join other events celebrating this fantastic addition to our regional public transit system. And this presentation is also going to be repeated by the other Joe later this month at the Transit on Tap. Right? Said it right? All right. And catchtheorange.com. That's the catchphrase. Thank you very much.